Will schools and universities soon be gone? If you think about it, there is an information transfer that needs to occur. You could also call it knowledge transfer. Now, this knowledge transfer is currently not specified to an individual. The only thing the individual does is it basically makes its journey, it has to make its journey through the knowledge, and this is the thing that connects them with the knowledge. But the journey itself is of course based on you, but the material and the whole environment is not adapted to you and your needs. So take a classroom full of students. These 30 people now will be taught the average speed, at the average speed of all these different people, maybe slightly higher, maybe slightly lower, depending on how fast actually the curriculum needs to be done in a given amount of time, and so on and so on. So one could argue that this, at least with the current state of technology, would already be something that can be solved far better. There are a few companies out there that already offer something for specific topics, but another thing to consider is the fact that if you want to, right now for example, you cannot just do a degree in the next 2 months. You could, but you would have very many hurdles. But what if you could potentially, so if you could intellectually, if you could just set aside time and study for 2 months? This is also something you cannot really do. So therefore, what if knowledge and the thing in your brain would actually be in much closer proximity? And what if the knowledge actually constantly, the knowledge itself obviously didn't, but what if the intermediary, that is currently universities, institutions, schools, teachers, what if this intermediary was much better at specifying the knowledge to you and making it your own journey? Of course, you could still, again, standardize this journey, but just by adjusting the speed at which everybody can take a course, for example, and allowing individual learning, because just think about 10 different things somebody needs to, or let's just say 10. We have 10 different students in a classroom. It's a very nice classroom. And they need to understand 10 different things. Every single student probably will have a different speed at which the student understands each individual subject. Therefore, we have a total of 10 multiplied by 10 different learning speeds for a given subject. And these are only 10 students and 10 subjects. Now, one can see the potential problem with that. And that's the current solution, basically. So I think the solution is that we engineer standardized programs that then adapt to the specific student and allows him or her to have an individual learning journey throughout the standardized curriculum still, and to also take tests and exams at any given point in time. And therefore allowing an individual student to, for example, to do high school in, I don't know, a few months, maybe a few years. Of course, now there is also the problem with intelligence. The faster now somebody goes through this system, or is able to go through this system, the faster he's able to do more things or learn more things. But the current system is just a suboptimal solution entirely, because currently, basically, if you think about the IQ distribution, of course this is often controversial, but if you were at school, there are people that learn faster, there are people that learn slower. And that's not just subject specific, I would argue, but it is usually the same ones that learn something slower or faster. Of course, it again depends on the subject to some degree. It depends on many other variables to some degree. But it also potentially depends on one thing we could simplify it down to words, which is the thing we call for intelligence. And even if IQ and things like these are controversial, we just assume there is something like intelligence, and the higher it is, the better somebody performs on cognitive tasks. With computers, for example, it's also not that difficult. We just call it processing power. Of course, processing power has different elements to it and different dimensions, But a phone, for example, is not as powerful as a PC, at least a current PC, usually. Or my Casio watch from 10 years ago is also not as powerful as my phone. There is a difference, and these differences probably exist to some degree at least. I am definitely not Albert Einstein. And apart from the identity, I'm also not on the cognitive level of Albert Einstein, I guess. Now, a program that would try to constantly feed me things that Albert Einstein would understand, Albert Einstein actually, I would fail constantly. But if I maybe had more time and I could watch these problems in more detail, and therefore the problem would infinitely expand into more and more detail until a person understands, and then basically retract back to the more abstract, would be the potential solution. Just breaking a problem down more and more and more until you understand it, and then going back to the more abstract would be a potential good strategy for applying something like this. There are already different iterations to things like these. The basic problem, I think, with even recording lectures is the fact that what happens if you don't pay attention for 10 seconds? Nothing. So this is a problem, because if you constantly check, for example, if somebody learns something by constantly asking questions back, then you make sure the person learns. And this also, I mean, watching a lecture, for example, and not writing anything down, of course people can understand something, but the main problem is that in a university lecture, for example, you could sit in and think about something completely else. I don't want to argue for forcing people to understand this, but most people who are at university, at least, are usually at their free will at university. With schools, obviously, it's different, but there is something like brilliant. For example, I have tested a few of these. I tried it a little bit, and it seems to go in the right direction. What if universal knowledge, not in terms of university, but what if knowledge was just something that is a program that constantly adapts to your needs, that constantly considers all the different variables that they are. For example, if you just ate, or let's just say you just slept for 8 hours, then you probably have more brain power compared to you being sleep deprived for the last 3 days. And if a program knows this and constantly adapts to your needs, then it constantly can present you with the ideal problem that preserves your flow basically throughout a program and doesn't bombard you with problems that are way too frustrating. These are all different variables we in the future at least can consider in order to optimize a learning experience. There seems to be at least some benefit to learning being fun. And fun is just a function. It's not just, but it seems that there is a simplification that when is learning fun? It is fun probably whenever the problem is not too hard, but the problem is also not too easy. Because if it is too easy, then we get bored, and this is the same problem that happens in every classroom. The people who already understood, they get bored, and the problem in the middle, they don't. But on the low side, the people who didn't already understand, they would need more explanation. And the middle, of course, is not really existing, because the middle is just an ideal that is infinitely small. Actually, everybody is either on the left or the right side. For any given situation, of course, this again can depend on the person and also the subject. But it seems that the current solution is just very inoptimal. And it is just almost, it seems like it could fit into something we had 300 years ago. But currently, we haven't found yet a solution. So what would be a solution? A solution would be maybe a multi-platform approach with programs running on your phone, with potentially, even though it's potentially a data nightmare, to have students with smartwatches to check out the heart rate and how well they are able to focus at that point in time, and their skin temperature and things like these. But if we would be able to implement something like this, and this probably is the future of learning, at least to some degree, at least to what I understand of this, at least this seems to be, to me, a problem that could be potentially solved in the near-term future, then we could just fasten or speed up the learning process. Therefore, people would have, at a given learning time, basically much more time because the learning time is just more efficient and therefore shortened. So if the program is still the same, people could have degrees in like 1 year instead of 3 years, because the program constantly adapts. Maybe some people would need 5 years, but these people would have needed 5 years anyway, potentially, to understand it fully, for them to be able to actually use the thing they learned. Now, of course, there is also the argument that you just get a certification in order to be certified for something, and you actually don't really want to learn the thing, but that's just a side effect. That's just a symptom of the current system. Because not eventually, but ideally, we could constantly prove the things we actually did. And in an ideal world, everybody would know basically what the other person's skill level actually is. And no one would have to betray the other person with a degree, for example, which he maybe has bought online, or maybe he has even studied but didn't understand it. Because the degree is just an external certification, of course, also for how well you are able to perform over time and study something over time and extensively and intensively. But ideally, somebody who wants to employ somebody else would just have the information what this person is actually capable of. And not... Because over the long term, this is what probably leads to the best outcome for both parties. And well, this is how one could potentially revolutionize actually the learning system.